Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. I am your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. Excuse me while I power down my heater in the background. Listeners, there we go. That's better. I want to welcome to this week's conversation Senator Wendy Harrison, who is one of the senators for Windham County. And you may usually know her work on either the Senate Institutions or Transportation Committee. But today, we are talking about her work on the Vermont School District Redistricting Task Force.
Yes.
I made John Walters say that for me last time he was on because I couldn't say it.
Right.
Well, so glad you're here, Wendy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Olga. I'm always happy to be here and talk to you.
Well, I think this is a great topic, too, because, the task force's work, I've been kind of watching, engaging, and the report you put out is pretty impressive. For me, I was very excited to see some data around education for a change and to read through how you got to the recommendations you got to. So just for listeners, because there's been a lot of coverage around the report, and I would say specifically coverage around the fact that the governor was expecting redistricting maps based on kind of his proposal, and that didn't happen. And I think that's where a lot of coverage has been. So where I'd like to start with you, Wendy, is let's set the table for listeners who have not been deep into this. And
sure.
Just like, what do we need to know now?
Right. Well, so I'll go back and explain my perspective on what we did and why we did what we did. So Act 73 was passed last year. It was in kind of at the last minute. There were a lot of moving parts, and it passed, but not with an overwhelming majority. The governor signed it. It has a lot in it, and it was sold as a bill, as a mechanism to reduce costs in education, as a way to reduce property taxes. So it was very focused on property taxes, and it also had an equity component, and the reasoning was that the changes and redistricting would improve equity. And the first step, and this was required in the legislation, but I never saw a reason other than that requirement to do redistricting first. But that was more of a policy requirement rather than a logical, necessary requirement to the system. That's my take out of it. So the school redistricting task force was appointed, and there were 3 senators and 3 reps, and then 5 folks who were really amazing experts in education. And I am so grateful for the non-legislative people who were on the task force. They spent huge amounts of time. They shared their experience and their opinions and their recommendations. They were all very caring about the system. I mean, you can tell when people care and when they're just doing it to do it. They were doing this in the summer, and it was a lot of work. But that kind of expertise is incredibly valuable. 2 of them in particular, Jay Badams and Jen Bojorn, her name is challenging. They both are retired superintendents in Vermont who did do a consolidation of districts. And so they both had that experience. Neither one is in the job now, which I think is helpful. And they're both PhDs. And our first, well, let me step back a little bit and talk about the process a little bit more. So our charge was to come up with up to 3 maps of new districts. And the assumption was that those would be, well, more than an assumption. It was required that the districts have between 4,000 and 8,000 students.
Right.
And the assumption was that it would be mandatory. And the mandatory part is something that the task force, most of us on the task force, had very much concerns about. And I especially had those concerns because I was hearing it from task force members and I was hearing it a lot from my constituents.
Well, so, we had already gone through Act 46, and for a lot of districts, it wasn't a lot of work for not a lot of payoff, I think, was how a lot of people feel.
And some of those districts have have changed back from what was consolidated. Some are still feeling the issues or feeling the pain of those consolidations. And no one really, we received no evidence that the consolidation saved money. So that was an issue. I was a little frustrated that we kept using SU and SD as just phrases that everyone used. But the problem to me was that they meant different things to different people. So supervisory union for some people means tuitioning. For other people, it means local control, and which are 2 very different things. So we tried to talk about exactly what they didn't like about either SU or SD. And because my district, my area is Windham County, basically. And we have very different situations in our district. Some of the superintendents are understandably frustrated by the complications of SUs, especially. There's a lot of just paperwork and extra work that doesn't directly impact kids. But do you want me to stop there? Because
I think, yeah. So what, remind us what recommendations the task force did, because I think, at least in the news coverage, the expectation was that there would be mandatory redistricting. And at one point, the governor had floated the ideal redistricting as 5 huge districts for the entire state. And instead, the task force put forward 3 recommendations.
Right.
Remind us what they are. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Right. No, that's okay. So the first one is cooperative education service areas. And we already have the first one of those. They were originally called BOCES, but they're not a layer of government, as some people have said. They're basically an organization that supports school districts. So, for example, school districts now, they have contracts for all sorts of things. They have contracts for transportation. They have contracts for IT services. And if they could have contracts in common with other school districts, then they wouldn't have to manage those contracts, and they would save money because you'd have a larger group contracting for that service. So that's one thing that their CESAs now, regional shared service structures. And so the one that exists now is in the southeast area of the state and does include our district. And it just came about in the last few months. It took 5 years to get it in place, though.
Oh, wow.
The others will take less because this one has paved the way. But those are ways to save money, and if our goal is to save money, that's where we should look. And it's not something experimental. It's in many states already, and it's just a logical way to procure. And then another big issue that we have in the schools is finding enough teachers and enough money to give kids the support they need for in special ed, because especially after COVID, kids are pretty traumatized still, and they missed a lot of time. And the stresses of being a kid now, even without COVID, I could talk about data, kids code, but I won't. But what these agencies do is they will hire the special ed teachers so that they're available for the schools as the schools need them. So there's just tremendous efficiencies in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we should do no matter what. But so and we don't even need to change the legislation. So we just need support. And then voluntary mergers, certain voluntary mergers, and we have those identified. We have some of those identified in the report, because there are places where it would be logical to merge. And so the task force isn't opposed to merging, but the majority of us are opposed to mandatory, forced mergers. That's the issue. That's a problem. And then comprehensive regional high schools,
Hmm.
which means high schools that provide a lot of AP classes, and also are integrated with career and technical education, because that's really important. And that's important to a lot of parents, to employers. And we've been talking about CTE, since I've been in the legislature. So this is a really good opportunity to elevate that conversation too. So those are the three recommendations.
Okay. I want to go back to are you calling them CESA or CSAs?
We can call them CSAs. I don't know if other people are calling them CSAs, so just beware.
Well, however, the cooperative service areas.
Yes.
What I found interesting about them, and I just want to check this with you to make sure I'm seeing it correctly, is they seem to me like to have a little more flexibility than a formalized district would have. That, whoever came together under this cooperative, um, they could decide as the cooperative what services they needed the cooperative to provide. Um, and it could kind of flex and change depending on how the schools in the cooperative needs flexed and changed. Am I seeing that properly?
Yes. Well, the schools would have a like a board level, or not the schools, rather the districts would be the board
Mm-hmm.
of this group. So the CSAs wouldn't have students. They're
Oh
not
yeah,
in.
no, I understood that,
Okay, I'm sorry.
but as far as the services they delivered for
Yes.
students, they could flex and change depending on what the schools involved in the cooperative needed.
Definitely, because some schools would want different things than other schools. And so, say in transportation, there might be schools or districts who want very little transportation, so they wouldn't have to pay for transportation. So it would be like a I don't want to call it a company, because it's not a company. It's a nonprofit that works for the districts. But what it would do is provide, its job is just to service the districts. Its entire job is to get the district what it needs at the most efficient method and at the lowest price.
Okay.
So that's their whole job, which is a big job. But it takes all of, or not all, but it takes a good chunk of that administrative burden off of the district. So
Mhm.
so because the district and the schools need to be focused on kids,
Mhm.
right? I mean, people are concerned about our reading scores, and the way that you get literacy increases is you focus on it and you just focus on reading and at the school level, the teachers and the kids. And so we need to support the administrators, and this is one way of supporting the administrators who can then support the teachers and the kids.
Thank you. Now, one thing I feel we often struggle with in Vermont is balancing keeping costs down, keeping education opportunity high, but also finding areas of scale, economies of scale, excuse me. And we also have kind of when it comes to funding, we've also got this dual system of a state pot of money with local control. And so it's often felt to me like a lot of different threads are pulling against each other when we're trying to move together. I'm wondering with these three recommendations, can they answer those kind of tensions? Kind of like what can they do and what can they not do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, the I think our system is just ridiculously complicated, honestly. I mean, it's crazy. And it keeps changing too.
Yeah.
So that's not helping. But the benefits of our system are that it does start and end at the town level or district level, whichever way the district is comprised. And I just want to say I personally and professionally see local government as the best kind of government. And as much as you can get to be close to the people, you have the higher chance of doing what is best for the people, right? Now, in something like education and many other things, you have to make sure that the locals aren't discriminating or doing something that is unethical or harmful. But aside from that, it's just locals know what they need, and our towns are so different from each other, and our schools are so different from each other. We obviously need standards, but the way that you get to those standards is important, and there's a context in local communities that is really important. So, but getting back to your question, the CISAs can reduce the total amount of money that needs to be sent to operate the schools.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely. I have no doubt about that. Our system, and there are others who you should talk to about the financial system, but like one thing is the school meals. Those are in the education budget. Do they need to be in the education budget? Maybe not. There's other things that are in the education budget that in other states are in a different budget in the a different fund. Um, so, transportation possibly. I believe it's in the education budget. Maybe the transportation fund is having issues. Um, but so those are things that we can look at. Um, but I this proposal doesn't change the structure.
The
So let
structure of
the structure that you mentioned is overly complicated.
okay.
Of the money starting from the schools and going up, um, and before we change that structure, we need to be careful. It's a really complicated system,
Mm-hmm.
and to just expect change this quickly, as was anticipated, in Act 73. I just don't think that's realistic or responsible.
Interesting. Um, yeah, I, I'm just kind of processing what you said because I do think what it's reminding me of is quite often when we're looking at the ed system, particularly the ed system being too expensive, and property taxes being too high. That's where people see the expense. Um, we are looking for like a one shot single bullet that's just going to lower property taxes. Um, and they're actually that might be the piece that people see, but it's only a small piece of the bigger picture of
Right.
all the levers that are getting pulled.
And we heard from 5,000 people in this process.
Wow.
We heard many of them in person because we had 4 public hearings we had great attendance, and then some other agencies or groups put out surveys, and so we heard from people through surveys too, and it was all happening at the same time, so it's very timely. And what we heard from so many people was, yes, we don't like high property taxes, but we don't want you to mess up our schools. We don't want you to decimate our schools.
Mm-hmm.
Schools are just really, really important to communities, and it's not just a logo or something. I mean, it's the functioning is important, and people care about their kids, and they're worried about their kids having to be on a bus for an hour, and that's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think we also need to know, I hear from folks in more rural communities, um, if we and they have said to me, if we want to support local economies, we need to have things that people want in their local community. And that usually are the third places: the schools, the libraries, the coffee shops, the hospitals, all those sorts of things. And I know not every town can have everything, but it does raise a question if, on the one hand, we want local rural economies to thrive, and on the other hand, we're taking away the things that attract people and attract money
Right,
to the
definitely.
economy.
Yeah, and especially elementary schools. And Act 73 did say local elementary schools and regional high schools and something in the middle for middle schools. And if you interpret local to be town, then you would have, if a town wanted to, have an elementary school in the town. So the town would be the district, which is how our region started. And many towns do have at least one elementary school,
Yeah.
which is that's really important to have something for. And you could even do like K through 3 or K through 4. But we just need to do it deliberately and not in haste.
Mm-hmm. We have just about 5 minutes before the first half of the show is over. Um, boom. Um, and I know in the second half, we're going to talk about some of the responsibility the task force felt when it was making its decisions. And we also might pull up some maps for people on YouTube to watch. But because this is the happy hour and I'm trying to be much more explicit with this question, when you were going into this process, what were there stories that you were telling yourself about how our school system as a whole worked that either changed when you saw the data, or maybe you were like, no, this isn't a story, this is like actually happening? Like, what was that process for you?
Interesting. Well, I agreed to be on the task force because there wasn't representation of our area.
Hmm.
So what I did immediately was start to talk to people and ask teachers, ask administrators to just tell me what they thought. And so I learned a lot. And I learned how complicated it was. is.
Will be.
Yes, yes. And there are benefits to how complicated it is, just in the sense that one mistake of a single system could just devastate the whole place, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if all the small components are doing their thing, they can do it on their own in some way, just
Mm-hmm.
generally. So I don't think I'm answering your question.
Well, I guess I'll ask it a slightly different way. So this is the story I hear at almost every town meeting I cover when they get to the school budget. I don't person stands up. I don't understand why this budget is so high. I don't understand why our taxes are so high. When I went to school,
Mm,
we didn't, it wasn't like this. And
right,
therefore we don't need what we have now.
right.
So like that's a story someone is telling themselves to explain why they don't think the budget's working. So I want, that's kind of what I'm putting to you. Were there anything like that, that maybe you went into the process believing one thing, and then as you were working on it, you're like,
Well, I certainly learned a lot about the financial part of the process, which is just overly complicated. So I think that might be part of the issue with folks,
oh, totally.
going to the meeting and not seeing the connection between their taxes and what their budget is. And that system has changed a lot in the last 4 or 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's hard to keep up with it. But as when I was a town manager, when I was in town government, uh, in here and in Florida, generally the school budget is of your local taxes. The school budget will be 75%, and the town will be 25%, just roughly.
Okay.
And those proportions are the same here in
Oh,
Vermont as they
interesting.
were in Florida, and so. And a very different perspective is that when so I was a town uh, council person and employee, and we would get so much grief on our budget, and then we'd see the school budget just fly through. So my experience is different than
Interesting.
but
Okay.
but I do see that here, where there are some towns where the school budget gets a lot of uh, just attention, basically. But I still see town budgets being more uh, just of a concern to folks than schools, with the exception of property taxes. And
Mm-hmm.
so property taxes is generally schools. So it just gets complicated. And I think that the having the property tax be so separate from what happens at the local level is really hard. And I think people are looking at ways to um, use other sources of revenue for things that are in the school budget, especially school portion of
Mm.
the budget, which would be helpful. In general, I think Vermont does need other sources of revenue, not just to um, ease up on the property tax, but also to just be more fair,
Hmm.
um, because we can. Another time, let's talk about stormwater utilities,
Okay.
because it's a very different mechanism, and it's a good mechanism, and it
Okay.
includes properties that don't pay property tax.
Oh,
So
interesting. Okay.
um, so that's a difference. So there's just so many ways to do things, and just the bottom line for me was don't do harm. And what we were mandatory um, uh, consolidations would cause harm. I am sure of that.
Okay. Well, Senator Wendy Harrison, we're going to hear from some underwriters here on WVEW. So we will be right back to talk more about school redistricting. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. If you're just joining us, I am Olga Peters, your host and producer, and I'm speaking with Senator Wendy Harrison about her work on the School District Redistricting Task Force.
Yep, a little bit redundant, but
But it's clear.
that's what
It's
it was.
very clear. Before we dive back into our conversation, I just want to thank BCTV for taking the video version of our show and sharing it with media centers around Vermont. And to remind folks that the views and opinions of everyone on the happy hour belong to those of the host and the guests, nobody else. Platforms, houseplants, pets, partners, no one else, just us.
My
So
pets have a lot of comments on things, so
but they're just yours.
yeah.
So Wendy, what I would like to start with is, right as we were ending in the first half, you mentioned how even though going into the task force's work, there was this assumption that it would come up with a recommendation for how we're going to kind of force mergers and redistrict the entire state of Vermont into much larger school districts of between 4,000 and 8,000 students. And then, of course, the task force said, you know what, this feels irresponsible. It feels like it would do more harm than good. And therefore, you put forward three different recommendations about creating the cooperative educational service areas, the voluntary strategic mergers, and then creating in the future, creating comprehensive regional high schools. Um, and, in the reports that you filed with the legislature that the task force did, there's a lot of kind of working through what each of these different recommendations would entail and what they would take to make them happen. But I'd like to talk now about what you heard from Vermonters as the task force. You held a number of meetings. What did people tell you? And let me know if this is where you'd like me to bring up that graph.
Um, yeah, so we had this was really important to the task force that we hear from folks, and we had a really good consultant helping us out also. And so we did our best. The legislation required 2 public hearings, and we had 4.
Mm-hmm.
And we heard very similar things from all areas of the state. So yes, if you could get that chart up, please. And so this chart, do you want me to talk about it while you get it up?
Sure.
Okay.
Can you see
so
it?
this chart is on page 12 of the report, which we can put a link. Yes, that chart.
I'll link in the show notes for the show.
Perfect.
Definitely.
Perfect, because there's a lot that if people want to know more, there is a lot that they should look at. So this chart shows, as it says, public priorities and confidence levels. And the first sentence is really important. It says, Vermonters prioritize quality of education and equitable access as the most important goals. Cost savings, efficiency, governance coherence, and preserving local voice were also valued but ranked lower. So you can see it here where improved quality is the red bar, equitable educational opportunities is the orange, and then increased cost effectiveness is the third. And a statement that folks would make is, yes, we want lower taxes, but we don't want you to hurt our schools.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very, very common response and message that that we received. And so, and this is a summary, so I'm just going to read just another. The commission notes many believe that forced consolidation under state mandate will not produce cost savings or better outcomes, especially in rural Vermont. And those opinions and understandings were members of our task force who were school professionals. They had similar opinions, but we didn't just go with their opinions. We heard from the public, and the public, our public is very discerning. Vermonters really do keep an eye on things, and it wasn't a heavy lift, in my opinion, to agree with what the public was telling us.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at this. I'm sorry?
Pardon, go ahead.
The second, there's another chart on that page.
On this page.
Did you want to ask a question about this?
Well, I'm not going to ask a question, but just for the benefit of our radio listeners, the chart we're looking at from the most important to the least important, I'll just read it. It's top priority, improved quality, equitable education opportunities, increased cost effectiveness, economies of scale, more coherent and consistent system, more effective governance. What I find interesting about this ranking, based on the public hearings you guys did, is it feels like it's flip-flopped from what the administration was hoping. Like, just not being a mind reader, but it comes across to me that in the guardrails that the Scott administration was giving the task force, most efficient governance and economies of scale and cost effectiveness were like more at the top of the list than it was for Vermonters. I don't know if I'm seeing that correct, but that was something that stands out to me as we're looking at this graph here.
No, I agree with you. And you can also look at quality. The two at the top, those are the outcomes of the system. And so people care about the outcomes.
Good point. Thank you. And then you wanted to talk about this second graph.
Yeah. And yes, thank you. And then if you can just go back down a little bit so that you have the text. Yes. So the confidence levels, this is this is what Vermonters think about what we're proposing to do, which is a different, this is like a future, an opinion on what we can do in the future versus the last chart. So when we say confidence levels, it's how confident are Vermonters that certain aspects, especially redistricting, would improve the system. And so if you're able to see this on the video, red is not confident, and red is the largest color except for more coherent and consistent system. So in a lot of ways, this is a different lens on the same types of questions, and it shows that people are consistent because quality, again, is the most important thing, and that has the highest bar, that the highest proportion of the bar that says that they're not confident that redistricting would provide an improvement to quality. The only one where the coherent, the not confident is equal to the somewhat confident and very confident is a more coherent and consistent system. And I agree with that. The system would be or could be more coherent, but not confident is still seen by half. I'm not explaining this well. I'm sorry.
Well, I think
I hope people read it.
The takeaway, and yes, I'll be linking to the task force's website where all their reports are listed in the show notes so you can sit down and look at these graphs. But I think my takeaway is when I look at this figure two, the confidence levels across 6 criteria, and the 6 criteria are the ones we read before: improved quality, equitable educational opportunities, increased cost effectiveness, economies of scales, more coherent and consistent system, more efficient governance. What this says to me is that even though the state has been working really hard on education reform and looking at taxes and Act 46 and all these things, that they haven't been working, and that a lot of people's confidence in what may happen should the state get involved is not high in general, um, based on the people you talk to. And that seems pretty significant to me.
Yes, it's very significant. And then let me read one paragraph at the
Sure.
end. It's the implications of this, where it says research shows that reforms lacking alignment between experts and communities. So that would be the administration and towns. So lacking alignment, struggle to gain legitimacy, and are harder to implement.
Hmm.
Durable change requires trust, shared understanding, and process that honors local voices. So even if we did go this way, the likelihood of making of getting the benefits of forced mergers, um, it's extremely unlikely to work.
Okay.
Um,
One question I wanted to ask you: when I was reviewing last night the task force's work, I also went back and I reviewed some of the proposals that the governor had put forward last year when he first proposed these new districts. And I know, at least in the news coverage, the governor has been quoted basically saying the task force ignored Act 173, kind of didn't do its job, sort of comments. And I'm using a very broad brush here. But when I was looking at the recommendations and sort of what the task force was tasked with, it seems maybe you didn't do in the letter of the law that the governor was asking for, but it doesn't seem, at least in the spirit of the law, that you strayed that far from what he was asking for. So I guess my question is, where did you stray? Like what is so vastly different between the recommendations and what the governor was hoping for?
so the governor was hoping. I mean, obviously, I don't know what's in his mind, but
Right.
the what I believe,
For Monday morning quarterbacking here.
yeah, the uh, uh, on paper, we were to deliver up to 3 maps.
Okay.
So at least one map, maybe 2 maps, maybe 3 maps, and we did we did make several maps, and a big shout out to the IT folks and the GIS people at the state. They're amazing, and so we actually now have a mapping tool that anyone can use, and which will help other folks who are looking at this system. So we did look at maps. I advocated for a county based map, because I see value in overlapping things that the state already does by county level, and I could see some efficiencies there. Um, the There was a map that was based on CTEs, roughly, and that was a map that was under consideration almost until the end. But we ended up voting against that map. The majority was opposed to that map. It would have been it would have had Windham County plus some of Windsor County as one district, and that's just that would have been irresponsible. Our our existing districts. It's not perfect, but smashing them all in
They kind of formed
without a lot
for
of thought,
reasons.
it would just be completely irresponsible. So I voted against that one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so then we do have maps of the cooperative service agencies, which is different, and hopefully people won't confuse those maps with district maps. They're noted that way, but that could be a source of confusion. And the explanation, and I think it's very reasonable, is that it would not have been responsible to produce maps. And we had several uh, uh, process and priority statements, and I'm just looking for our principles, our guiding principles, because we spent at least a meeting and a half talking about how we were going to proceed and under what assumptions we would make, and what values we would use, because schools are fundamental, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to tell you that, and I don't need to tell your listeners that. So the guiding principles we had were be pragmatic and focused. Um, there are so many misunderstandings, and people sometimes think that you know that others understand them. We just have to be really, really clear and eyes wide open, basically, and then acknowledge political realities. And that goes to what the governor is asking for. Recognize the need for system stability. Um, so that's important. Number three was use data, not assumptions. I've talked about that already. For honor local knowledge. Local knowledge, it's not that we value it just because it's there and the people are telling us something. It's valuable. We have a better system when it's part of the local community. Do no harm. That was a big one. And then design for resilience. Ensure the proposed structures can withstand future demographic, fiscal, and policy shifts. So the do no harm is really that was my motivation in having not giving maps as examples, because those examples would likely be taken out of context and seen as recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Does
I
that
think
answer?
that is key.
Okay.
Thank you. Um, and it you outline in your report, speaking of data, that the forced mergers, or districting the state out into five big districts, there was no proof that that would actually save money.
Right. There's no proof that any merger saved money. There's no proof that the mergers we already did saved money. And some, as I said earlier, some districts are still seeing negative impacts from those.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there is data that the cooperative service agencies do save money, and relatively simply too. That's another benefit to them. It's a nice, simple organization.
And like you said, it doesn't add extra bureaucracy. It doesn't add extra governance.
No, it takes away from it. It massively improves the work ability of superintendents and their staff to work on education related aspects versus administrative stuff. And like the buses and purchasing, and I mean the IT systems that can take a lot of time. So having IT specialists, and you can have a higher level of service if you work together on a single contract.
Mm-hmm. Um, One thing I want to quickly talk about is we're going to try to bring up another map and about school sizes. And I think it was really interesting. You had a few maps in the Appendix E that were really interesting and looked at like what's close to each other in a 30-minute drive and what isn't. But then
Right.
also the map we're going to pull up is about districts with or schools with less than 500 students. Districts?
Or districts. I think it's
Okay.
districts. But well, we'll see when you get it. But this is somewhere. This is something that I thought was good in Act 73 was it did have acknowledgement of sparse areas
Mm-hmm.
and how they might need more support. So this map, you can see these are districts. So the purple districts are the ones with the daily, the equivalent of 500 or less students a day in FY24. And I was really surprised to see how, from this map and from other things, Windham County is very similar to the Northeast Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see Windham County, where except for Windham Southeast, that our areas, our districts are very small in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the number of kids. And then, if you do you mind doing a little circle thing about
Up here?
yeah, the Northeast Kingdom, especially the clump at the top
Right
by the
here.
border. And so they're similar to us in size and sparsity, as it's called now. And they also have cross-border schools that they attend.
Mm-hmm.
So they attend schools in New Hampshire on the northwest side. Some of those kids go to New York. More of our kids are going to public schools in Massachusetts rather than private schools, which is something new. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we learned about through this process. And that's something that is not good about the current system because the individual towns contract with schools. The towns who have tuitioning contract with whoever they want, basically. Well, it's not whoever they want now. It used to be whatever school they wanted, but the Act 73 did reduce the number of private schools that can receive public money to a list, and so they can't send their kids to France anymore for school, which I don't think we should be paying for that. Um, but the state doesn't have a good handle or a good way to find out where kids are going because
Mm-hmm.
we found that there's a fair amount of kids going to public schools in Massachusetts where they pay more than the Massachusetts tuition. So that's something that I think the state needs to look at because when we send money out of state, it's money that we don't have for our schools.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and unfortunately, we only have about 5 minutes left, so we probably won't be able to dive deep into this. But I do encourage people to check out the reports because school choice, aka tuitioning, has been a big issue for a lot of folks, both positive. Oh, if I'll move to a town because there's school choice for my kids in high school. But also negative. Are we draining our public schools of both students and money because of tuitioning? And the report did a deep dive into at least the data that you did have.
right, and the public comment too. We had really interesting public comment about the schools and
Mm-hmm.
different reasons that people value the independent schools. And the independent schools themselves obviously are very different characters. And some of them operate more like public schools and others not. And the state has put guardrails on those in the past and the legislature tried to put guardrails in recently. And so that's going to be an ongoing conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but of course it gets into education and children, so it's probably going to be an emotional conversation too.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so we have just a few minutes left, Wendy, and I know all we've done is scratch the surface because the task force did a lot of deep work here. Um, what's next for these reports, for these recommendations, for the task force?
Yeah, we will see. That's a really good question. So I'll be with Senator Hashim this next week at Windham Southeast, and I know that there's a lot of talk about the task force. Um, the next step is what happens in the legislature. So, whether or not it will be, how the two houses will take this on. Um, we don't know right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think the public is engaged. The public knows all over the state now. People are aware, they're engaged. So I think it will be a robust conversation. And I'm glad because this is something really important that shouldn't be done without a lot of public engagement. So I think it'll be I hope that it will be a productive conversation and that we'll listen to each other and not start using labels because the labels are just not helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And just for listeners to know, next week, Emily Kornheiser will be on the show and we'll be talking about the December 1st letter that came down from the Tax Commission about the anticipated or approximate tax increase around property taxes and the education tax. I didn't say that well.
No, that's
Oh, good. Thank you. So we'll be digging into that a little bit more next week. So it's all education all the time.
right.
Here on
Well, it's important. So
it is.
You're very topical.
We try our best. Thank you, Wendy. Anything you want to leave listeners with before we head out?
Just stay in touch. Talk to your school board, talk to your superintendent. There are so many different perspectives on this. But I think it's really important, and I think Vermonters do keep kids in the forefront, and that's what we should keep doing.
Let me ask you this in case it's helpful. I mean, obviously, people can bring any concern to their lawmakers, but is there any perspective or information or experience that maybe people could share that you feel has been missing or would really help the task force to know about certain things? Like, is there anything topical that comes to mind?
Well, the task force is essentially finished. Our work is finished. I expect we'll be presenting at some point. But if folks want to be engaged, I would suggest that they go to the Senate Education and House Education websites, those two committees, and follow up. We're fortunate to have Senator Hashim is on the Education Committee. You can reach out to him. Emily Kornheiser is obviously very much involved in this. People can reach out to her.
Mm-hmm.
So and things could happen very fast. So
we'll see.
Stay tuned.
On a future episode.
Right.
Well, Senator Wendy Harrison, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Olga. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. And as always, the Montpelier Happy Hour is on WVEW LP Brattleboro every Friday at 2, rebroadcasted on Wednesday morning, and wherever you find your podcasts. Have a great weekend, everybody.